And we're on. Good evening to everybody on Facebook and or YouTube who is watching this recorded. We have people here live as well. Um, we are going to look at Matthew chapter 4, verses 2 and possibly 3, God willing. And tonight, this is 40 Days Bible Study number 160. Y'all, 160. Here comes Janessa. All right, she's in. So I'm going to bring up the Bible. And more people are coming in. Welcome to Janessa. If she came in and she can hear me. Welcome to you. As others come in, we're looking at chapter 4, verse 3. All right, we spent like a week and a half or more on chapter 4, verse 2. Okay. Verse 3. I apologize for the coughing. I am still coughing. All right. Verse 3 says, "And the tempter came and said to him, If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." In looking at this, I want to step back one little bit and recognize that Luke 4:2, Mark 1:13a, the first part of Mark chapter 1, verse 13, and Matthew 4, verse 1 said he was here to be tempted, right? And tempted by the devil. There is no indication that the recorded test, this is the first recorded test that we're going to read. There's no indication that the recorded tests were the only tests that Jesus faced during the time. I'd speculate that these tests were shared because they were the toughest during that time. Jameson Fawcett Brown had offered something better. So after I typed that my speculation, I continued reading, and the JFB said that the 3 tests are recorded because Jesus was tested internally before that during the 40 days of the fast. Meaning, like, he was tested in his mind, right? And when we consider that, hey, that's how we get tested, right? These 3 were recorded because they were literally face to face with Satan. This means Jesus faced a 2-staged test. And for most of us, we only face the first stage and we fail repeatedly. Yeah. This is another reason Jesus was needed as the sacrifice for our sins, capital THE, the sacrifice for our sins, because we can't even make it through a day without sinning. And the tests sometimes come from our heads, sometimes they just walk by. It could be like somebody's just literally walking by, and you get, as you see that person, thoughts of hatred, thoughts of lust, thoughts of pride, where you look down at the person. And as you see the person, those thoughts come in, your mood changes. That's not being very nice. That's not being very holy. We need to do better. All of us. Me too, right? The tests that Jesus faced were far beyond our comprehension. So Jesus was totally undeserving of any punishment. And that's why he was the best sacrifice. He did not deserve it. And he took it because he considered we could not take it. At each turn, though, we must remember the devil's purpose in the temptation. And that is, his purpose is to get us to stop trusting in God. People don't like to hear this one either. I've been saying that a lot over these past few days. I'm saying things that people would not like to hear, or pastors don't preach. I've been doing that on a lot of live stuff too. We stop trusting in God when we succumb to temptation. That's fact. Because if the temptation is here, and I say I trust God, God says, flee immorality, sexual immorality. God says, submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. But if the temptation is here and I offer zero resistance, I'm not showing that I trust God because I'm not listening to him. If you trust him, you listen to him. If you trust him, you turn to him and you turn away from the trouble. We don't trust him when we slip and we fall into temptation. Hard facts. Expositor's Greek Testament suggests that this was not a planned fast. So the man, Jesus, he didn't go training for a fast. Some people train for fasts. Yeah, they do. You know, they go in and they start practicing like not eating a little bit at a time. They avoid certain kinds of food, little at a time. Some people prepare for a fast by overeating before the fast. Obviously, Jesus didn't do that, but even if he did, it wouldn't make sense because he's going for 40 days. He's not going for, a couple days. Right? Ellicott, though, disagrees with this because there was a similar duration for Moses and Elijah's fast. So Ellicott said Jesus planned this. We may not know for sure. Ellicott and JFB also believe that Mark mentioned the wild animals. Mark, what was it? Mark chapter 1. Let's just pop into Mark chapter 1 for a sec, y'all. I can get to that quickly. Mark 1:13. And he was in the wilderness 40 days, being tempted by Satan. And he was with the wild animals, and the angels were ministering to him. We see the mention of the wild animals here. And this mention of the wild animals shows that, sorry, their fierceness and their hunger would have added to Jesus' horror in this tough time. You see, when I read this, me with my innocent self would think, oh, the wild animals were trying to keep him company and being friendly. But this was Jesus, the humiliated version, the man version. When I say version, I don't mean like they're different versions of Jesus, right? I have to be careful saying these things. When I say it, this is Jesus carrying out his mission as, sorry, the human sacrifice that lives the perfect life, sinless. So Ellicott and JFB may be onto something here. These wild animals added to his horror. Now, as we look at this verse, some questions may come to mind. Was this a literal 40-day period of no food? Why was this time so specifically endured? That no food thing. Are we sure he didn't eat? Like maybe he sneak a snack? Like people say Kublai Singh fasts, he'd be eating, but on camera, you don't see him eating. Was it something like that? Obviously, no, right? Because Jesus, you don't compare Jesus with you, people who are just corrupt. The fact that we see in our text fasting 40 days and 40 nights, that's evidence to support that this is a literal 40-day and night period. The repetition, 40 days and 40 nights. So in case you think it was just the daytime, no, it wasn't the daytime. It was day and night. It was truly a day, 24 hours, right? Spin of the earth around its axis. Remember the repetition for emphasis system used by the Bible. It's something that I've pointed out before. When the Bible repeats something, it's for us. It's like dust piles. Pay attention to this. It's real. Sorry. Aside from that, the book of Matthew is an account of things that took place. What I mean by that, it's a historical recording. Therefore, allegory will not be used in the recordings. If he was recording the words of a speaker, and the speaker was speaking parabolically, parables, or allegorically, fine, that would be reported in the text. But let's be very clear that, sorry, for what's going on here, Matthew is recording history. And remember, he's doing it to convince the Jews that Jesus is the Messiah. All right? So this was a literal 40 days and 40 nights. No doubt here. A question arises, where do we consider it as Jesus not touching food at all? Again, yes, that's the answer. But here's some proof. The text again says he fasted 40 days and 40 nights. Luke 4:2. I didn't prep stuff for you all, sorry. Luke 4:2 says, where for 40 days he was tempted by the devil. He ate nothing during those days, and at the end of them he was hungry. So in case you read Matthew or Mark and you weren't sure, you see it literally said here, he ate nothing during those days. It's in plain English. We could combine these accounts to arrive at the literal time, 40 days and nights, and the conclusion that no food at all was consumed during this time by Mr. Jesus. We can take the Moses and Elijah references, because remember, Moses and Elijah also fasted 40 days. We take that as evidence to support the fact that Jesus didn't eat or drink anything during that time, because Moses and Elijah didn't eat anything during their 40 days periods. The word that is translated as he was hungry is epainasin. I got it right the first time. Epainasin. It's third person singular, aorist, indicative, active. I know that sounds, what is that? That means Jesus was hungry as a complete action, not an ongoing thing. He wasn't hungry during the fasting time. Yeah, we have proof of that too. Pulpit suggests that the fast was almost unconscious, meaning, as a human, Jesus was so focused on relating with the Father during the fast that only after the fast he would have been close to physical death, because it's like, I'm so caught up in what I'm doing, I don't even notice I'm hungry. Expositors, Greek Testament, JFP, Poole, and Cambridge all agree to that. So this one is a point where several scholars agree. Matthew Poole mentions Daniel's diet. And I like that term, Daniel's diet. You all know I make fun of people who call the term Daniel fast. I despise that term because it indicates people think that when Daniel did his special diet, he was fasting. He wasn't no fasting. He was still eating. He just chose a restrictive diet for possibly health reasons. That wasn't no fast. Poole had mentioned that because we need to understand and be clear. Jesus didn't abstain from certain pleasant food like Daniel did when he was in captivity. Poole also called the Roman Catholic Lent, his words, an impious copying of this fast of Jesus, as their reasoning is like drunkards. He used another word, sottish, I think. Their reasoning is like drunkards if they think fish instead of meat is sufficient to imitate and sufficient reason to mandate Lent. I just read that. I typed that yesterday, I think. I typed that or Sunday, and I'm not reading it and realizing just how harsh Poole was being. We know the scholars don't favor the Roman Catholics at all, but that was harsh. But you all know, I mean, I've made statements too about the Lent. The whole Lent thing is not real. There's no reason to mandate Lent fasting. And definitely it's not a fast if you decide no meat, but you could eat fish. That's not fast. It's a diet change. A fast means abstaining from necessities. And that means staying away from food. Okay? Poole adds that Jesus' miraculous acts are not recorded for us to imitate, but they are there for us to adore. They're not for imitation, but for adoration. That is powerful support for cessationists when you consider it. The reason Poole put that there is basically because the point he is making is many people will look at certain things and want to imitate it in the Bible, but it's not there for imitation. This is here for us to praise, to worship, and glorify God for how great He is. A question is, why the 40-day period? Now, as many people would tell you, for the number 40 is associated with testing and suffering. I did not go into every single time 40 was mentioned in the Bible, but off the top of my head, rain fell 40 days and 40 nights, and the fountains of the deep were opened up to flood the earth. 40 days and 40 nights. Jesus fasted these 40 days and 40 nights. Elijah fasted. Moses fasted that time period. Israel was wandering in the wilderness, in the desert for 40 years. Moses' life is broken up into 3 periods of 40 years. Jesus was on earth 40 years after, 40 days, sorry, 40 years, 40 days after resurrection and before ascension. So 40 occurs a lot. The number 40 is associated with testing and suffering. Moses and Elijah, who would appear with Jesus before his crucifixion, right? Remember that time where Jesus took a couple of his disciples up and he told them, stay back a little bit. And he went, and Moses and Elijah appeared talking to him. And Jesus shone. Like light was coming out from him, basically. He met those two, and those were the two men who fasted for the same period. So one may think that a precedent was set for men who would embark on a miracle-filled duty for God's purpose of salvation. The 40-day fasting might be a precedent for certain men who are going to embark on a miracle-filled ministry. Moses did a lot of miracles. Elijah did a lot of miracles. Jesus. Sorry. The exact reason for the 40-day period in this case must also lie in the impossibility. You see, Jesus was sustained physically by God's power, and the period of time had to add to the proof because it defies natural human limits. I literally today told a kid, if you don't get water in 3 days, you'll die. But since you had water, you won't die without water right now because the cafe didn't want to sell them water or something like that. There's a major discrepancy that I came upon as I was reading this. John 1. All right, let's go to John 1 for a sec. I want to show you something in John 1. The word became flesh, right? So John the Baptist's testimony is here. And the next day he saw Jesus coming toward him. Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. John confesses this, as we've done this before in Matthew 3. He said, I myself did not know him, but for this purpose I came baptizing with water, that he might be revealed. And the Spirit, God himself would have told John the Baptist, the one who you see the Spirit descend and remain, that's the one who baptizes with the Holy Spirit. So John was told before Jesus came, look for that person. And he saw that person was Jesus when the Spirit descended like a dove. Now, John here is talking as people asked him, why are you baptizing if you're not Jesus? And then we're seeing here, the next day he saw Jesus coming toward him. Shortly after that, the next day again, John was standing and he looked at Jesus and said, behold, the Lamb of God. And then again, the next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. I came upon this and I was like, this could present a discrepancy for some people because each of these days are consecutive days. One day, the next day, the next day, the next day. It may seem that this is talking here immediately after Jesus was baptized. Now, nowhere here did we see that Jesus was baptized. All right, because this is after Jesus was baptized. And in this, we do not see John actually baptizing Jesus. It's not recorded in the book of John that John the Baptist actually baptized Jesus. So somebody might say, oh, he baptized him here, and the next day he saw Jesus coming toward him. Or maybe he baptized him here, and the next day John was standing, and Jesus walked by. How is that possible if Jesus went to do his fast? Let me just be clear. I'm bringing this up right now. John, the book, does not record the baptism of Jesus. So there is no, Jesus was baptized and the next day he was walking by. There's none of that. Jesus was baptized, not recorded. And after the 40 days of fasting and testing, John saw him. John the Baptist saw him. And that's where we get the next day, the next day, the next day. Okay? So these are 3 days after Jesus returned from the fast. Just in case you go studying and you read this and you're like, oh no, my mind is blown. Jesus was baptized and then John saw him the very next day. He didn't go for the fast. Or when did he go to the fast? Or was it in his head? No, none of that. I bring this up because out there people will take advantage of you and me because we don't have knowledge. My people perish for lack of knowledge. We don't want to be those people. Final thoughts. Benson puts a nice perspective as he shares the three things. He said that he shares the 3 men who fasted 40 days. And he shared that a little connection they had with the law. Each of these 3 men, I said that wrong earlier. The 40-day fast men would have been Moses, Elijah, Jesus. Moses was the giver of the law, Elijah, the restorer of the law. And now Jesus, the fulfillment, because Jesus himself said, I did not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law. Benson added that such deprivation, no food for 40 days, it weakens a person, and temptations are sure to come at those times. We do not see or receive ordinary deliverance when we are in those kinds of tests. Take this personally and learn that the worst of tests, during those tests, we see the greatest of God's deliverance. Only if we're submissive. Only if we're submissive to God instead of weak. And don't get me wrong, it's easy to be weak when you are broken down, in this case, physically broken down from hunger. Stand strong in the weakest of times, you will receive the greatest of God's deliverance, and you'll see the greatest of God's movement in our lives. Benson believes the angels ministering to Jesus means that the angels fed him. That would have been in Mark. Yeah. The angels were ministering to him. So Benson says that includes feeding him. I don't know if that happened or not, doesn't say. Bengal gave some comparisons in a short write-up as he mentioned Moses and Elijah. He shared that Moses experienced glory in his fast. And in Exodus 34, you can go check this. Moses came down from the mountain and the skin of his face shone. He was glowing, but not like you say a person looks like he or she's glowing, they're taking care of their skin. Literal glowing. Moses was glorified in a sense. He was glowing in front of men, while Jesus was humiliated because Jesus here is broken physically. An angel brought food for Elijah before his fast, while angels ministered to Jesus after his, which could be evidence, the angels ministering after. Since we brought food for Elijah before, we'll bring food for Jesus after. It's possible. I'm not saying no, I'm just not saying yes. Jesus had this special period of time before his public ministry. And then again, like I mentioned, at his ascension to glory. The root word for hungry is painao, P-E-I-N-A-O, with an accent on the O. Painao means greatly desire and hungry, to stress the level of need, greatly desire, all right? Satan did this same you can be glorified scam to the first two humans that he will try on Jesus a little later. But unlike them, Jesus resisted and Jesus overcame. And that's why Jesus will restore mankind to God later in this very book, because he's going to be tortured for our sakes and risen from the dead, taking the torture we are supposed to get. We can't take the torture. By take the torture here, I don't mean, you have to go and take a whipping or whatever. I mean the true punishment for your sin, the true punishment for my sin is hell forever. Too many people out there think they're good. Why do bad things happen to good people? No, friend. There is none righteous, no, not one except God. People don't realize just by existing the way we exist, verse 4, we're going to start verse 4 just before we close up. Verse 4 says, oh, I said verse 4. No, this is verse 3 still. In this verse, the tempter came to him and said to him, if you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread. Here we see an actual quote from the tempter, an actual quote from that liar, the devil. This interaction shows a face-to-face nature of their dealings. And as we've already identified, this would be a face-to-face thing. Some scholars didn't agree to that, but this is not like what we experience when we're tempted. Even if it plays out like a conversation in our heads, where your temptation talks to you and no, yes, no, I should do this, no, I shouldn't, not like that. We would not be able to stand an interaction with the devil or any demon and walk away at ease. Worse yet, if we're hungry and broken down physically. The devil appeals here to Jesus' pride with a very provocative start. If you are the Son of God. He often does this to us when situations arise and our pride must be appeased by retaliating or acting up to show people who we are. This is where we are commanded, deny yourself. Nobody needs to know how bad you are. Bengel believes that Satan was pretending to be somebody else. And only at the end, when Jesus calls him by his name, where he says, "Begone, Satan," right? Only at the end of the tests, Jesus would show him up. It was like, I know it was you all along. The evidence for this is that he provides is that Jesus responded to the devil as a person would speak to a scribe by saying, "It is written." The scribes were bookkeepers. The devil didn't doubt Jesus as the Son of God. He was challenging him to act less like a man, more like a superior being. This way, we see how he is so subtle in his tactics. He didn't mean, I don't think he's the Son of God, prove it. He didn't mean that. He meant, If you're the Son of God, you could take care of your business. No need to suffer. If Jesus bailed on his natural needs by doing supernatural things for himself, he'd be taking the easy way out. That would negate the claim to living a perfect, sinless human life. Okay? Jesus did miraculous things, but as we've seen, he didn't do miraculous things for himself. He did miraculous things for others. The devil may not have known Jesus' purpose on earth, and that's a reality now. But seeing Jesus' humble state meant that Jesus was living one particular way. So the devil here was trying to get him to break out from that and live another. The devil is just disruptive. He sees things going one way as God would have it, and he just wants to disrupt. Pulpit shared that some scholars have said that the devil tried to make Jesus doubt himself and doubt himself as God, but that is not true. The devil is a liar, but the devil is not ignorant. He knew that Jesus is God, and maybe here he was testing the extent of Jesus' willingness to use his powers. But that's just my speculation. I don't know if that's true. Pulpit also shared that some people point to bread-shaped fossils or bread-shaped rocks in God's people's land. And he says that people, when they do this, they put it as support for the event because, they're like, oh, look, this looks like bread. And if it looks like bread, the devil might have, been walking with Jesus and said, look at that. You could turn that into bread. It's not likely. Pulpit dismisses that same thing. And I'm making it clear that if some clown on social media comes talking to tell us how the Bible is real and there are bread-shaped stones in this area of Israel, and this proves it, those are people who are looking for something their parents didn't provide. Attention. Don't be fooled. A lot of things that sound feasible are just appealing to our little egos. I want to see amazing new things that are not in the Word. You are not their parents, so don't give them that attention, please, because you're encouraging their bad behavior. Vincent Word Studies, I'm almost done. Vincent Word Studies offers even more of the fanciful actions and thoughts and ideas that some people may have because, sorry, there are people that talk about certain stones and call them Elijah's melons or Mary's peas and the tears of Jacob found in certain areas. Those are purely tourist gimmicks that please the minds of the ungodly. People who want, the nice little trinkets to remember their trips because it makes them feel so close to the Lord. Y'all, the day carrying a stone makes you feel close to the Lord, you're failing and you're not thinking about the real Lord. This is real. People are looking for a sign from God will never be satisfied because they don't have capital F faith. I am being very clear about this because I don't want us to fall. As I'm doing this, I'm creating a list of tricks that the devil uses. So far, I have 5 items. He challenged the position and the ego by asking if you are the son. He appealed to a desperate need, an actual need. You're hungry, you should eat. He promoted disobedience to God. Jesus came to live as a man, and that was his plan as God. And the devil was trying to make him break that. Nobody here, you are God. You could turn it into bread to help yourself, right? He acknowledged God's power to break down defenses. 5th one, I have 5 so far. He sees things at work and he tries to disrupt those things by trying to make Jesus cheat at living a human life by turning stones to bread. The devil uses these tricks, and I'm making up this list that I'll update as I go along. You'll have the entire list at the end of it and the pieces that we get as we go along in our docs as well. All right, this was 40 days Bible study number 160. Just for you all to know, this is our 30, I can't find it. Right, this is our 33rd lesson on Matthew so far. I am really trying hard to go quickly, but it's just not happening, okay? But 33 weeks now, we've been studying Matthew, and we're going to continue as God leads and God blesses us. All right, so those watching on YouTube and on Facebook or on Facebook, God bless you. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that this encourages you to go study the word. If it seems complex and difficult, don't let that intimidate you. If you love God, you'll keep his commandments. That's the word. If you love him, you will seek wisdom because his word says seek wisdom, like treasure, buried treasure. So please study the word and encourage other people to study the word, because that's the only way we get to know him well. So God bless those of you watching this live. Have a good night.